Let's wade into the law with some basics. First, obscenity names an exception to the First Amendment. That is, the Supreme Court has declared obscenity to be a category of speech that local, state, and federal governments can restrict or suppress. And in fact, all 50 US states plus the federal government have obscenity laws. We all more or less take for granted that the First Amendment does have some limitations, and this is one of them. That's part of why it's tossed around by activists who want to limit certain kinds of speech. There's a precedent for doing so. Throughout the 20th century, publishers, prosecutors, and judges worked out the definition of obscenity in famous court battles over books like D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, James Joyce's Ulysses, and Allen Ginsberg's Howl. Then in 1973, the Supreme Court set out a test that still determines what can be legally declared obscene and therefore banned. We call this the Miller test. You can see its 3 prongs here. The first prong says the work must appeal to the prurient interest. Basically, it has to be intended to arouse the audience. The second prong says the work has to be patently offensive or obviously, clearly offensive. The last prong says the work has to have no real value to society in the realm of ideas. To be obscene, a work has to meet all 3 criteria. If it fails even one prong, it isn't legally obscene. That's a pretty narrow scope. Other parts of the Miller test narrow the scope even further. These guide how we determine prurience, offensiveness, and value. First, we should judge not by the standard of the most impressionable among us, but by average people. Second, we have to focus on what is offensive according to today's standards in the community in question, which usually doesn't mean a town, but can mean a state. Third, what counts as dangerous has to be spelled out in law before the fact. It's not enough to know it when you see it. And fourth, you can't single out one word, passage, or image to condemn the whole thing. You have to consider what it means in the context of all the other stuff in the work. All of these ensure that obscenity is only prosecuted narrowly and according to precise criteria. Under these standards, very few things are truly legally obscene. Some things do qualify, mostly abusive pornography, but the label almost never applies to literary works or popular media. Despite this decades-long effort to define the term obscenity as precisely as possible, the term is still thrown around pretty loosely in public debate over controversial works of art.